In the heart of a sprawling city where skyscrapers cast long shadows over crowded streets, a young woman named Elena hurried through the chaos of rush hour. Her earbuds blared a podcast, drowning out the honks of taxis and the chatter of passers-by. Her phone buzzed incessantly, emails from her boss, texts from her sister, notifications from apps she barely used. Elena's life was a whirlwind of deadlines, meetings, and the constant pressure to prove herself. At 28, she was climbing the corporate ladder at a marketing firm, her ambition a fire that both fueled and consumed her. But beneath her polished exterior, tailored blazer, confident stride, she felt a gnawing emptiness. She was connected to everyone, yet known by no one. Successful, yet unfulfilled. In control, yet spiraling. That evening, after another 12-hour workday, Elena collapsed onto her couch, her apartment silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. She scrolled through social media, her thumb flicking past curated lives, friends on tropical vacations, colleagues celebrating promotions, influencers preaching self-love. Each post was a mirror reflecting her own inadequacy. Why didn't her life feel as vibrant? Why did her achievements taste so hollow? She tossed her phone aside, the screen's glow fading into the darkness of her living room. For the first time in months, she sat in silence. Not the curated silence of a meditation app, but raw, unfiltered quiet. And in that stillness, a question surfaced, soft but persistent. What am I chasing? Elena's story is not unique. In a world obsessed with self-promotion, where success is measured in likes, followers, and corner offices, we are all in some way running a race with no finish line. We fill our days with noise, podcasts, playlists, notifications, because silence forces us to confront what we'd rather ignore. The ache for meaning, the longing for connection, the fear that we are not enough. We live in an age of pride, not just in the boastful sense, but in the subtler, more insidious belief that we must be the architects of our own happiness, that our worth lies in what we achieve, what we own, what we project to the world. Yet in this clamor, a quieter voice calls us back. 2,000 years ago, a carpenter from Nazareth stood before a crowd and spoke words that still echo through time. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Christ's Sermon on the Mount was not a call to weakness, but a radical redefinition of strength. Meekness in his teaching was not passivity or timidity, it was humility, the courage to let go of self-importance, to trust in God's plan over our own. Centuries later, Pope Francis has echoed this truth, urging us to embrace the strength of humility in a world that glorifies the ego. In his 2016 homily at the Chrism Mass, he said, "Humility is not a posture, but a way of life, a choice to serve, rather than to be served to love without counting the cost." For Elena, and for us, this teaching feels countercultural, almost impossible. Humility. In a world that rewards the loudest voice, the boldest brand, how do we embody meekness when our culture equates it with being overlooked, stepped on, forgotten? Yet, Christ and Pope Francis do not ask us to shrink ourselves. They invite us to expand, to find freedom, in surrender, to discover strength in letting go. Humility is not about denying our gifts or ambitions. It's about anchoring them in something greater than ourselves. Elena didn't know it yet, but that night on her couch was the beginning of a journey. The silence she stumbled into was not empty. It was pregnant with possibility. In the days that followed, she began to notice moments that pierced her routine. At work, a colleague named Marcus, known for his quiet demeanor, stayed late to help a struggling intern asking for no credit. On the subway, an elderly man gave up his seat to a pregnant woman, his smile warm and unassuming. These were not grand gestures, but they carried a weight that Elena's own achievements lacked. They were acts of humility rooted in a love that sought no reward. Curious, Elena began to explore. She dusted off a Bible her grandmother had given her, its pages yellowed but unmarked. She read Christ's words in Matthew 23, "The greatest among you will be your servant. For those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted." She stumbled across Pope Francis's writings, too particularly his 2013 exhortation Evangelii Gaudium, where he wrote, "We need to be realistic and not assume that our audience understands the full background to what we are saying. A missionary heart is aware that it has to grow in humility." Elena's discovery of these words was like finding a map in a labyrinth she hadn't realized she was wandering. The idea of humility as a path to freedom lingered in her mind, but it felt distant, like a language she didn't yet speak. Her days were still a blur of meetings, deadlines, and the relentless pressure to outperform her peers. Yet something had shifted. The silence she'd stumbled into that night on her couch wasn't a one-time event. It was a door she kept returning to, even if only for a moment. In those pauses, she began to notice the weight of her own pride, not in boastfulness, but in the quiet ways she armored herself against vulnerability. She avoided asking for help, fearing it would expose her weaknesses. She measured her worth by her productivity as if rest were a betrayal. She craved approval, yet rarely offered it to others. One morning, as she sipped coffee at a corner cafe, Elena overheard a conversation that stopped her cold. Two women sat at a nearby table, their voices soft but clear. One, a nurse named Clara, spoke of a patient she'd cared for, a young man injured in a car accident. His body broken, but his spirit fierce. "He kept thanking me," Clara said, her voice tinged with wonder. Even in his pain, he noticed everyone around him, the janitor, the aides-me. He'd ask about our days, our families. "I've never seen someone so present." Her friend nodded, then asked, "How do you stay so calm with all the chaos at the hospital?" Clara paused, stirring her tea. "I don't know. I pray a lot. Not big prayers, just little ones. Help me see them, God. Help me love them. It's not about me. It's about them." Elena felt a pang not of guilt, but of longing. Clara's words echoed Christ's teaching in John 13, where he washed his disciples' feet and said, "I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you." This was humility in action, not a grand gesture, but a daily choice to serve, to see others as Christ saw them. Pope Francis had spoken of this too in his 2015 homily at the Vespers for the solemnity of the conversion of St. Paul. To be Christian is to be a servant, to lower oneself as Jesus did to live for others. Elena realized she'd been living for herself not selfishly, but narrowly, her world shrinking to her own ambitions and anxieties. She began to experiment tentatively with small acts of service. At work, she offered to proofread a colleague's report, not for recognition, but because she saw the stress in his eyes. She thanked the barista who made her coffee, not with a rushed nod, but with a genuine smile and a question about his day. These moments felt awkward at first, like wearing shoes that hadn't been broken in. but they also felt alive, as if she were waking up to the people around her. She started to pray, too, not the formal prayers of her childhood, but clumsy, honest ones. God, show me how to care. Show me how to let go. One evening, Elena attended a community event at a local church drawn by a flyer about Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si. The room was filled with a mix of people, young professionals, retirees, families with restless kids. The speaker, a priest named Father Daniel, shared the Pope's call to care for our common home, not just the environment, but the human family within it. He quoted Francis, "Everything is connected. Concern for the environment thus needs to be joined to a sincere love for our fellow human beings." Father Daniel wove this into Christ's command in Matthew 22. Love your neighbor as yourself. He spoke of love as an active choice, a willingness to see the dignity in every person, especially those society overlooks. Elena listened, her heart stirring. She thought of her neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, a widow who lived alone in her building. Elena had passed her in the hallway countless times, offering polite nods, but never stopping to talk. Guilt crept in, but Father Daniel's words cut through it. Don't let shame stop you. Start where you are. Love is a muscle, use it, and it grows. That night, Elena knocked on Mrs. Alvarez's door, a plate of cookies in hand, as an excuse. The older woman's face lit up, and they talked for an hour about Mrs. Alvarez's late husband, her garden in Puerto Rico, her love for old jazz records. Elena left feeling lighter, not because she'd done something good, but because she'd connected, truly connected with another soul. This small act opened a floodgate. Elena began to seek out ways to serve not as a checklist, but as a way of being. She volunteered at a food pantry where she met Jamal, a single father who worked 2 jobs to support his daughter. His gratitude for a bag of groceries was humbling, but so was his humor, his resilience, his insistence on asking Elena about her day. She saw Christ in him, not in a lofty, abstract way, but in his quiet dignity, his refusal to let hardship define him. She thought of Pope Francis's words in Amoris Laetitia. Love is shown by little things, by attention to small daily signs which make us feel at home. Jamal's small gestures, his smile, his questions were love made visible. As weeks turned into months, Elena's life didn't slow down. Her job was still demanding her inbox, still overflowed her city, still buzzed with noise. But she was changing. She began to see her stress not as a burden to escape, but as a teacher. When a project fell apart at work, instead of spiraling into self-criticism, she prayed for patience and asked her team for input, admitting she didn't have all the answers. To her surprise, they rallied their collaboration stronger than her solo efforts. When she felt disconnected, she reached out not to social media, but to people. She called her sister, listened to her struggles, and shared her own. She invited Marcus, the quiet colleague, for coffee, learning he'd grown up in foster care and found solace in mentoring kids. His story wasn't just inspiring, it was a mirror reflecting the strength of a life lived for others. Elena's prayers grew deeper too. She found herself drawn to the Gospel of Luke, where Jesus says, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me." The cross, she realized, wasn't just suffering, it was surrender, the daily choice to let go of pride control and the need to be seen. Pope Francis had echoed this in a 2020 Angelus address. The cross is not a decoration or an accessory. It is the sign of a love that gives itself completely. Elena began to carry her cross not as a weight, but as a compass guiding her toward love. One afternoon at the food pantry, Elena met a woman named Rosa, whose sharp wit and warm laugh belied the fact that she was homeless. Rosa shared stories of her life, her years as a school teacher, her love for poetry, the addiction that had cost her everything. Elena listened not as a volunteer helping, but as a friend learning. Rosa quoted a line from a poem, "The heart is a house with many rooms, make space for others." Elena felt a lump in her throat. She thought of Christ's parable of the Good Samaritan, who didn't just see the wounded man, but stopped, knelt, and cared. Pope Francis had reflected on this in Fratelli Tutti. We are called to rediscover our vocation as citizens of our respective nations and of the entire world, builders of a new social bond. Rosa wasn't just a stranger, she was Elena's neighbor, her sister, her teacher. Elena began to carry Rosa's words with her, making space in her heart. She noticed the people she'd once rushed past, the street vendor, the exhausted cashier, the teenager lost in his headphones. She offered small gestures, a kind word, a moment of eye contact, a silent prayer. These weren't solutions to the world's problems, but they were seeds planted in faith that they'd grow. She thought of Christ's promise in John 15, "I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit." Her fruit wasn't measured in promotions or likes, but in connection, in love that rippled outward. One evening, as Elena walked home, the city's noise felt different, not overwhelming, but alive, a chorus of human stories. She passed a church and slipped inside, drawn by the glow of candles. Kneeling in a pew, she prayed not for success or ease, but for courage to keep loving, to keep serving, to keep humbling herself. She thought of Pope Francis's words in a 2017 homily. The Lord does not ask us to be heroes. He asks us to be His witnesses, to live His gospel in the ordinary moments of life. Elena wasn't a hero. She was just a woman trying to live differently, to let Christ's humility reshape her prideful heart. As she left the church, the night air was cool, the stars faint against the city's glow. Elena felt a quiet strength, not the kind that shouts, but the kind that endures. She was still ambitious, still driven, but her chase had a new direction, not toward a fleeting spotlight, but toward a love that lasted. Her life wasn't perfect, but it was fuller, richer, because she was learning to see others, to serve them, to let God's grace work through her small, faithful yes. The stars Elena glimpsed that night lingered in her mind as she moved through the following weeks, their faint light a reminder of something enduring amid the city's glare. Her life, once a treadmill of ambition and distraction, was beginning to feel like a path not always clear, but purposeful. She carried the lessons of Clara Jamal Rosa and Mrs. Alvarez like stones in a pocket, each one grounding her in the truth that humility wasn't a one-time act, but a way of seeing, a lens that revealed the sacred in the ordinary. Yet, as her heart opened, so did her awareness of the world's brokenness. The same city that pulsed with human stories also groaned with conflict, division, anger, and a stubborn refusal to listen. Elena felt it at work, where egos clashed over credit and control. She saw it online, where arguments erupted over politics, faith, and who was right. She sensed it in herself, too, in the moments when pride crept back, whispering that she deserved better, that her way was best. One morning, Elena boarded a crowded subway, her mind replaying a tense meeting from the day before. Her team had been tasked with a high-stakes campaign, and tempers had flared. A colleague, Sarah, had dismissed Elena's ideas, her tone sharp and superior. Elena had bitten her tongue, but resentment simmered. As the train rattled along, she noticed a man standing nearby, his clothes worn, his hands clutching a tattered book. He was reading aloud softly to himself, passages from the Psalms. "Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me." His voice was steady, unbothered by the commuter's stares. Elena felt a tug, a memory of Christ's words in Matthew 5. "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." She wondered what it would mean to be a peacemaker, not just in global conflicts, but in the small daily battles of her own life. That evening, Elena attended a lecture at the church where Father Daniel spoke about Pope Francis's 2019 apostolic exhortation, Christus Vivit. He quoted the Pope young people, "You are called to be builders of peace, to counter the culture of division with a culture of encounter." Father Daniel explained that peace wasn't the absence of conflict, but the presence of love rooted in humility. He tied this to Christ's teaching in John 16. "Peace I leave with you. My peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives." The world's peace, he said, was fragile, built on compromise or dominance. Christ's peace was transformative, born of a heart willing to listen, forgive, and seek the good of others, even when it hurt. Elena thought of Sarah. Her instinct was to compete to prove her worth by outshining her colleague. But Father Daniel's words challenged her to consider another way. What if she approached Sarah not as a rival, but as a person with her own struggles and fears? The idea felt risky, vulnerable, like stepping onto unsteady ground. Yet she remembered Rosa's poem about the heart as a house with many rooms. Could she make space for Sarah even in her frustration? The next day, Elena took a deep breath and invited Sarah for a quick coffee during lunch. She didn't plan a speech or rehearse an apology. She simply asked Sarah about her week, her ideas for the campaign, her life outside work. Sarah was guarded at first, her answers clipped. But as Elena listened, really listened, Sarah softened. She admitted the pressure she felt to prove herself, the fear of being overshadowed. Elena nodded, sharing her own doubts about measuring up. The conversation wasn't a grand reconciliation, but it was a start, a crack in the wall between them. Elena felt a flicker of Christ's peace, not because the tension vanished, but because she'd chosen love over pride. This small victory emboldened Elena to seek peace in other corners of her life. At the food pantry, she noticed how volunteers sometimes snapped at each other, stressed by long hours and endless need. Instead of staying silent, she began to mediate, gently redirecting conversations toward solutions. She suggested a shared prayer before shifts, a moment to center themselves. The group embraced it, and the atmosphere shifted less frantic, more collaborative. Elena saw Pope Francis's vision in action from his 2020 encyclical. Fratelli Tutti Peace is not merely the absence of war. It is a task that demands building a culture of encounter where we listen to others and seek the common good. But peace-building wasn't always gentle. Elena learned this when she visited Rosa at a shelter, hoping to bring her a warm meal. Rosa was quieter than usual, her wit dulled by a recent eviction from a temporary housing program. She spoke of the system's failures, the way it dehumanized people like her. Elena felt a surge of anger, not at Rosa, but at the injustice. She wanted to fix it, to march into an office and demand change. Yet Rosa's words stopped her. "Don't fight for me, Elena. Fight with me. Listen first, then act." Elena realized her impulse, though well-meaning, was rooted in pride, a need to be the savior. True peacemaking required humility, the kind Christ showed when he knelt to wash feet, the kind Pope Francis modeled when he embraced prisoners and refugees. Elena began to listen more deeply. She joined a community advocacy group not to lead, but to learn. She heard stories of families priced out of their homes, workers denied fair wages, immigrants navigating a maze of bureaucracy. Each story was a call to action, but also a lesson in humility, to recognize her limits, to trust others' expertise, to work together rather than alone. She thought of Christ's parable of the mustard seed in Matthew 13. "The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and planted in his field. Though it is the smallest of all seeds yet, when it grows, it becomes a tree." Her efforts were small, but they were seeds planted in faith. As Elena grew in peacemaking, she faced her own inner conflicts. She struggled with forgiveness, especially toward her father who'd left when she was a child. His absence was a wound she'd buried under achievements, but it resurfaced in moments of quiet. One night, reading Luke 6, she stumbled on Christ's words. "Love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you." The command felt impossible. How could she forgive someone who'd caused such pain? Yet, Pope Francis's 2016 homily on mercy offered a path. Forgiveness is not a single act, but a journey. It begins with a choice to let go of bitterness, to pray for the other, to trust God's healing. Elena started small. She prayed for her father, not with warm feelings, but with raw honesty. "God, I'm angry, but I want to forgive. Help me." She wrote him a letter not to send, but to release the words she'd carried for years. The process was slow, painful, but it freed her bit by bit from the weight of resentment. She began to see her father not as a villain, but as a man with his own brokenness. This didn't erase the hurt, but it softened it, making room for peace. Her journey with forgiveness spilled into her relationships. When Marcus, her colleague, made an offhand comment that stung, she didn't retreat into silence. Instead, she spoke to him privately, sharing how it felt without accusing. Marcus apologized, and their friendship deepened. Elena realized that peacemaking wasn't about avoiding conflict, but engaging it with humility, listening, speaking truth, and seeking reconciliation. She thought of Pope Francis's words in a 2018 homily. "Peace begins in the heart, in the small gestures of forgiveness and understanding that we offer each other." One Saturday, Elena joined a neighborhood cleanup organized by Father Daniel's parish. The group was diverse: teenagers, grandparents, immigrants, locals, all working to clear trash from a park. As they worked, stories flowed. A teenager named Diego shared his fear of being judged for his accent. An older woman, Grace, spoke of losing her job during the pandemic. Elena listened, her hands dirty, her heart full. The cleanup wasn't just about the park, it was about building a community, a culture of encounter. Christ's words in Matthew 18 came to mind. "For where 2 or 3 gather in my name, there am I with them." She felt his presence in the laughter, the shared purpose, the quiet acts of care. The cleanup ended with a picnic, and Elena found herself sitting with Diego. He was shy, but when she asked about his dreams, he lit up talking about his love for coding. Elena, who'd learned a bit of coding in college, offered to help him with a project. His gratitude was humbling, but so was his curiosity. He asked about her life, her faith, her struggles. Their conversation was a bridge built on mutual respect. Elena saw Pope Francis's vision from Christus Vivit unfolding. Young people be builders of bridges, not walls. As spring turned to summer, Elena's life felt less like a race and more like a dance, imperfect, but graceful in its rhythm. She still faced stress, still wrestled with pride, but she was learning to pause, to pray, to choose peace. At work, she and Sarah collaborated on the campaign, their ideas stronger together. At the shelter, she and Rosa wrote poetry, their words a shared defiance against despair. At home, she called Mrs. Alvarez, their chats a lifeline for them both. One evening, Elena sat in her apartment, the city's hum, a soft backdrop. She opened her Bible to Philippians 2, where Paul writes, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of the others." The words felt like a mirror reflecting her journey. She wasn't perfect, but she was trying to value others, to build peace, to live Christ's humility in a prideful age. Outside, the city glowed its lights, a constellation of stories. Elena prayed her words, simple. God, make me a peacemaker. Let my life be a seed, small but faithful. She didn't know where the path would lead, but she trusted it step by step, knowing that peace, like love, was a gift that grew when shared. The prayer Elena whispered that evening settled into her soul like a seed finding fertile soil. It wasn't a prayer for grand revelations or dramatic change, but for the courage to keep walking, to keep choosing humility in a world that often rewarded the opposite. Her life, once a tightly wound coil of ambition and anxiety, was beginning to unfurl not into ease, but into a deeper kind of purpose. The city around her still thrummed with its relentless pace, sirens, wailing screens, flashing voices competing, but Elena was learning to move through it differently. She carried the stories of Rosa Diego, Sarah, and others like lanterns, their light guiding her toward a life less about self and more about connection, less about winning and more about giving. One crisp autumn morning, Elena walked to work, her breath visible in the chilly air. The streets were alive with the usual chaos: vendors hawking breakfast sandwiches, commuters weaving through crosswalks, a street musician strumming a guitar. But today, Elena noticed something new. A young woman sitting on the sidewalk, her cardboard sign reading, "Lost my job. Anything helps." The woman's eyes were downcast, her hands trembling in the cold. Elena had passed countless such signs before, always with a pang of guilt and a hurried step. This time, though, she stopped. Not because she had a plan, but because Rosa's words echoed in her mind. Listen first, then act. She knelt beside the woman whose name was Lila and offered her coffee from a nearby cart. They talked about Lila's love for painting, her struggle to find work after a layoff, her fear of losing hope. Elena didn't have solutions, but she had time, and she gave it freely. As she left Lila's quiet, "Thank you for seeing me," pierced her heart. That encounter stayed with Elena, stirring a question. What did it mean to truly see others, not just in moments of compassion, but as a way of life? She thought of Christ's encounter with the woman at the well in John 4, how he saw her not just her sin or her status, but her thirst for something more. He offered her living water, a love that saw her fully and invited her to new life. Pope Francis had reflected on this in a 2017 homily. Jesus teaches us to see the other, to meet them where they are, to offer them the mercy that heals. For Elena, seeing others wasn't about fixing their problems. It was about recognizing their dignity, their worth as children of God, even when the world overlooked them. This realization reshaped her daily rhythm. At work, she began to notice the unseen janitors who cleaned late-at-night, assistants who juggled endless tasks, interns who hesitated to speak up. She made a point to learn their names, to ask about their lives, to thank them not as a formality, but as a recognition of their value. One intern, Priya, confided in Elena about her fear of failing her pressure to please her immigrant parents. Elena listened, sharing her own struggles with self-doubt. She didn't offer advice, just presence, and Priya's relief was palpable. Elena saw Christ's teaching in Matthew 25 come alive. Whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. Every small act of seeing was a way of meeting Jesus. Yet this way of living wasn't without cost. Elena's new perspective clashed with the culture of her workplace, where efficiency often trumped empathy. During a team meeting, her boss, Greg, pushed for a campaign that prioritized profit over ethics, targeting vulnerable consumers with manipulative ads. Elena felt a knot in her stomach. In the past, she'd have stayed silent, prioritizing her career. But now she thought of Pope Francis's words in Laudato Si. We need to reject a throwaway culture which discards people as easily as products. She spoke up, her voice steady but respectful, suggesting a campaign that balanced profit with integrity. Greg dismissed her, his tone curt, and the room grew tense. Elena's cheeks burned, but she felt a quiet strength, not in being right, but in being faithful. The fallout wasn't easy. Greg gave her smaller assignments, and whispers of "she's too soft" circulated among colleagues. Elena wrestled with doubt, wondering if she'd been foolish to risk her reputation. But in prayer, she found clarity. She read Luke 9, where Jesus says, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me." The cross, she realized, wasn't always dramatic suffering. It was the daily choice to stand for love even when it cost her status or approval. Pope Francis's 2021 homily on the Beatitudes echoed this. The poor in spirit are those who risk everything for the sake of the gospel, who choose God's kingdom over the world's rewards. Elena leaned into this risk not with reckless abandon, but with trust. She sought out allies at work like Marcus, who shared her values. Together, they pitched a pro bono campaign for a local nonprofit, using their skills to amplify a cause that mattered. The project wasn't glamorous, but it was meaningful, and it reminded Elena that her work could be a form of service, a way to see and uplift others. She thought of Christ's parable of the talents in Matthew 25. Her skills weren't just for personal gain, but for building God's kingdom one small act at a time. Outside work. Elena's commitment to seeing others deepened her community ties. She grew closer to Diego, the teenager from the cleanup, helping him build a coding project for a school competition. His excitement was infectious, but so was his vulnerability. He admitted feeling like an outsider, his accent a barrier in a mostly white school. Elena shared her own experiences of feeling out of place as a Latina in corporate spaces. Their bond wasn't just about coding, It was about seeing each other's struggles and dreams. She thought of Pope Francis's call in Fratelli Tutti. Let us dream then as a single human family, as fellow travelers sharing the same flesh as children of the same earth, which is our common home. Diego wasn't just a kid she helped, he was family, part of the human tapestry she was learning to weave. This sense of family extended to Rosa, whose poetry nights at the shelter became a highlight for Elena. Rosa's words were raw, weaving tales of loss and resilience, and Elena began to write her own poems, tentative at first, but honest. One night Rosa read a poem about a river, its current carrying both beauty and debris. "The river doesn't choose what it carries," she said, "but it keeps flowing, trusting the sea will sort it out." Elena saw a metaphor for her own life carrying joy and pain, success and failure, but trusting God to guide her course. She thought of John 7, where Jesus says, "Whoever believes in me, as Scripture has said, rivers of living water will flow from within them." Her small acts of love were rivers flowing from Christ's grace. Yet Elena's journey wasn't without setbacks. One evening she argued with her sister Carla over a family gathering Carla had skipped. Elena felt betrayed, her old need for control resurfacing. She wanted to win to prove her point, but as she stewed, she remembered Christ's teaching in Mark 9. Anyone who wants to be first must be the very last and the servant of all. She called Carla not to argue, but to listen. Carla admitted she'd been overwhelmed, her new job consuming her. Elena apologized for judging, and they cried together, their bond stronger for it. Pope Francis's words from a 2019 homily rang true. Humility means admitting we are not perfect, that we need others, that we need God. Elena's faith grew through these moments of surrender. She began attending Mass regularly, not out of duty, but desire. The Eucharist became a lifeline, a reminder of Christ's self-emptying love. She read Philippians 2, where Paul describes Jesus, who being in very nature, God did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the form of a servant. This was the humility she aspired to, not erasing herself but offering herself as Christ did. One day Elena received a call from Lila, the woman from the sidewalk. Lila had found a job at an art supply store, her voice bright with hope. She thanked Elena not for money or solutions, but for seeing her that cold morning. Elena wept not out of pride, but awe. She hadn't changed Lila's life, God had, through a moment of connection. She thought of Pope Francis's 2016 homily. Mercy is not a theory, but an encounter, a moment when we allow God's love to flow through us to others. As winter approached, Elena organized a community art project with Rosa Diego and others. They painted a mural in the park, each stroke a story of struggle, hope, love. The mural wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, a testament to their shared humanity. At its unveiling, Father Daniel quoted Christ's words in John 13. "By this everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another." Elena looked at the crowd. Lila, Rosa, Diego, Sarah, Mrs. Alvarez, and saw not just faces, but reflections of Christ. Her life wasn't free of struggle. Work remained challenging. Her relationship with her father unresolved, her own doubts persistent. But she was learning to see herself, others, God in every moment. She prayed each night her words, "A river, God, help me see. Help me love. Let my life be yours." The city's lights still glowed, but Elena's heart glowed brighter, a beacon of humility in a prideful age, trusting that her small, faithful steps were enough. The mural's vibrant colors seemed to pulse under the winter sky, a patchwork of stories woven into the park's landscape. Elena stood among the crowd at its unveiling, her breath visible in the crisp air, her heart full. The faces around her, Rosa's sharp grin, Diego's shy pride, Lila's quiet awe, Sarah's newfound warmth were more than a community. They were a testament to what happened when she chose to see, to serve, to love. Yet as the applause faded and the crowd dispersed, Elena felt a subtle shift within her. The journey of humility she'd embarked on wasn't a destination, but a horizon always stretching further. The mural was a milestone, not an endpoint. The world, with its noise and division, still called her to live Christ's teachings in new, deeper ways. Winter settled over the city, blanketing the streets in snow and silence. Elena's days grew busier. Her pro bono campaign with Marcus gained traction, earning praise, but also more responsibility. At the food pantry, holiday demand stretched the team thin. Her relationships, too, demanded care. Carla leaned on her during a work crisis. Diego asked for help with college applications, and Rosa faced a health scare that shook Elena's sense of control. Amid this, her own heart wrestled with old temptations, pride in her accomplishments, frustration when things didn't go her way, fear that she wasn't doing enough. Yet these struggles didn't defeat her. They sharpened her like a blade honed by resistance. She thought of Christ's words in John 16. "In this world you will have trouble. But take heart, I have overcome the world." Her troubles were real, but so was the grace that carried her through. One snowy evening, Elena sat in her apartment, a candle flickering on her table. She opened her Bible to Matthew 11, where Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." The words felt like a balm. She was weary not just from work or service, but from the weight of trying to hold her life together. Pope Francis had spoken of this in a 2014 homily. Jesus invites us to rest in Him, not by escaping the world, but by learning His humility, His trust in the Father. Elena realized that humility wasn't just about serving others. It was about surrendering herself, her plans, her need to control, to God's gentle yoke. This surrender became her anchor. At work, when Greg assigned her a low-profile task as a subtle jab, Elena didn't fight back. Instead, she prayed for patience and did the work well, not for approval, but as an offering. To her surprise, a client noticed her attention to detail and requested her for a bigger project. The outcome wasn't why she'd chosen humility, but it reminded her of Christ's promise in Luke 14. "For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted." Her small, faithful choices were seeds bearing fruit she couldn't predict. Elena's surrender extended to her relationships. When Rosa's health scare, a lung infection, landed her in the hospital, Elena felt helpless. She wanted to fix it, to make Rosa well, but all she could do was visit, listen, and pray. Rosa, ever the poet, whispered one day, "Life's a river, Elena. You don't control the current, but you can choose how you swim." Elena clung to this, praying not for miracles, but for God's will. Rosa recovered slowly, and their visits became a sacred space filled with poetry and laughter. Elena saw Pope Francis's vision from Amoris Laetitia unfolding. Love is patient. Love is kind. It always hopes, always perseveres. Her love for Rosa wasn't heroic. It was steady, rooted in humility's trust. This trust reshaped her approach to conflict, too. At the advocacy group, debates over priorities grew heated. Some pushed for bold protests, others for quiet diplomacy. Elena, once quick to pick a side, listened instead, asking questions to bridge divides. She suggested a hybrid approach, public awareness with private meetings, and the group rallied behind it. The process wasn't smooth, but it was fruitful, echoing Christ's teaching in John 17. My prayer is that all of them may be one Father, just as you are in me and I am in you. Pope Francis had echoed this in a 2020 homily, Unity is not uniformity. It is the harmony of differences built on humility and listening. Elena's role wasn't to lead, but to unite, to be a servant of harmony. Her faith deepened through these acts of surrender. At Mass, she began to linger after communion, letting the mystery of Christ's presence sink in. She read Colossians 3, where Paul writes, "Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience." These virtues weren't just ideals. They were her daily wardrobe chosen each morning in prayer. She started a journal not to track tasks, but to reflect on moments of grace. A smile from Priya, a thank you from a pantry client, a quiet moment with God. The journal became a map of her heart's growth, proof that humility was transforming her from within. One day, Elena received a letter from her father. It was brief, awkward, an attempt to reconnect after years of silence. Her first instinct was anger. How dare he resurface now? But she remembered her prayers for forgiveness, her letter unsent, but healing. She prayed again. God, I don't know how to do this. Show me. She wrote back. Not with warmth. She didn't feel, but with honesty. I've been angry, but I want to understand. Can we talk? The response was a step, not a resolution, but it was enough. Pope Francis's words from a 2016 homily guided her. Mercy is a bridge that connects God and man, opening our hearts to the hope of being loved forever, despite our sinfulness. Forgiveness was her bridge, built one plank at a time. Elena's journey of surrender also led her to confront her own limits. She'd stretched herself thin. Work, volunteering, relationships, and exhaustion crept in. One night, unable to sleep, she read Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. The words convicted her. She'd been serving, yes, but she'd neglected rest, as if stopping were weakness. Pope Francis had warned of this in a 2015 homily. We cannot give what we do not have. Rest in God and let Him fill you. Elena began to carve out Sabbath moments, walks without her phone evenings, with no agenda mornings in silent prayer. These weren't escapes, but encounters, spaces where God's love restored her. Her rest bore fruit in unexpected ways. At the food pantry, she noticed a volunteer, Amir, struggling with burnout. Instead of offering solutions, she invited him to join her for a quiet coffee, sharing her own need for balance. Amir opened up about his stress, and they began a weekly rest group for volunteers, a space to pray, share, and simply be. The group grew, becoming a haven for others. Elena saw Christ's invitation in Matthew 11 lived out, "Come to me, and you will find rest for your souls." Her humility wasn't in doing more, but in being present, trusting God to work through her limits. As spring approached, Elena organized a community festival with Father Daniel, a celebration of the mural and the bonds it represented. The park buzzed with music, food, and stories, Diego's coding demo, Rose's poetry reading, Lila's art booth. Elena didn't lead but served, setting up tables, greeting guests, listening to strangers. A reporter covering the event asked her role, and she laughed, pointing to the community. "I'm just one of them." Her words echoed Christ's in Mark 10. "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." Pope Francis's 2018 homily came to mind. The Christian is not someone who stands above others, but someone who kneels beside them, serving with love. The festival wasn't flawless. Rain-threatened schedules clashed, but it was alive with God's presence. Elena watched Mrs. Alvarez dance with a child, Sarah teach a teen to juggle Marcus, share his mentoring story. Each moment was a thread in the tapestry of humility woven by hands that chose love over pride. Elena felt Christ's words in John 15 resonate. "I am the vine, you are the branches. Apart from me, you can do nothing." Her efforts, her community, her very life depended on him. One evening after the festival, Elena walked home, the city's lights softened by dusk. She passed the church and slipped inside, kneeling before a crucifix. She prayed her heart a river. "God, thank you for seeing me, for teaching me to see. Keep me humble, keep me yours." The cross before her was no longer just a symbol. It was her story, her call to die to self and live for others. Pope Francis's words from Evangelii Gaudium echoed. The joy of the gospel fills the hearts and lives of all who encounter Jesus. Let us go forth, then, to offer everyone the life of Jesus Christ. Elena's life wasn't perfect. Work still challenged her relationships, still required effort. Her own heart still wrestled with pride. But she was free, not from struggle, but from the need to prove herself. She was a branch connected to the vine, bearing fruit through small, faithful acts. The city around her glowed its chaos, no longer a threat, but a canvas where her love, her humility, her surrender could paint God's kingdom. As she stepped into the night, the stars were faint but present, a reminder of the light that endured. Elena smiled, her steps light, her heart full. She didn't know what tomorrow held, but she trusted the one who held it. Her life was no longer a race, but a gift, a humble offering to a world in need of Christ's love.